Good morning readers, it's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf and welcome to part 2 of this week's Bookish Breakfast, where we are going to be talking about all things Victorian, in particular Tess of the D'Urbervilles in honour of Victober, which is a month-long read-along in the month of October hosted by Katie, Kate and Lucy, and I will link to their channels down below in the description. If you haven't heard of Victober, then obviously please go and check out their channels and find out what it's all about. It's a month-long read-along of Victorian literature. So I have got some very scattered notes on Tess, and we are going to be defending Tess's character and talking about Tess's character today, because when I made my little video about, you know, is Tess resilient or is Tess a wet blanket, a lot of people were a little bit on the fence really, and they weren't really sure whether Tess maybe was a wet blanket or maybe she was just kind of pushed by her circumstances, and that's really not how I see Tess, and I really love Tess as a character, so I just wanted to explain a little bit more about why she's so amazing. Before we plunge into that, I have got another little Victorian treat for you. It is this. So this weekend, Beau and I went to see his grandfather, and we were helping him out with some things around the house, and he decided that he would like to give us this. He said that he thought that I would be more interested in it than he was, which is probably true because this is a Victorian handbag, and as he said, he's not very interested in Victorian fashion. In theory, it's a Victorian handbag. So this belonged to Beau's grandmother. She was in her 90s when she sadly passed away quite recently, and she got it from her grandmother. So if we think of 90 years back from now, and then additionally some time for her grandmother, who's about 60 years older than her, it's perfectly feasible that this is Victorian. It's a metal mesh bag. I'll hold it up close to you. It's essentially like a chainmail pattern, and then when you open it, it's lined with something that is incredibly worn but looks like it was originally velvet. So I have done a tiny bit of research into this kind of thing because I wanted to be able to tell you a little bit about it. Essentially, they came into fashion in the Victorian era but remained popular particularly in the 1920s, so it could be a 1920s version. The picture that I found that most looks like it was from the 19-teens, so it could also be a kind of pre-First World War handbag, up until the 1950s, so potentially it's not really anything that old. But they did originally become popular in the Victorian era, and the reason for that was, as you can see, they are kind of chainmail, as I've mentioned, and we had that obsession with medieval stories and medieval histories that came in around that time. So if you think about something like Tennyson's The Lady of Shalott, or the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and all of their like artworks that related to old medieval myths and legends, this was something that you could just wear about your person that just hinted towards that fashion at the time. So it probably wouldn't have been something that you would hold in your hand. It would have been attached to a belt, you'll excuse the weird posture, something like that, and just carried a few articles such as like calling cards and so on. Unfortunately, it's not really an item that I can use because, as handbags go, it doesn't fit a book, so it doesn't meet my criteria. It feels like it should be in a museum, but they, according to my little bit of research, they're actually like relatively common things for people to have inherited from older family members. You can find them quite easily online if you want to do like Victorian fancy dress. So I think it's a little bit too common to count as like a museum artifact, so I think it's just going to be an interesting thing for us to keep, and you know, like my kids can take it in on Victorian Day one day in the future, if Victorian Day is still a thing. I had a Victorian Day. It was fun. We all dressed up and our teacher pretended to be a Victorian teacher and use Victorian discipline but didn't actually. It was really quite entertaining, aged 6 or 7, but that's a detour. I just thought that it might be something that if you were participating in Victober, you might be interested in seeing. And if you happen to be somebody who knows a lot about Victorian fashion, please do tell me if you have any other cool facts about this kind of handbag. Okay, so that is that. So now on to Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and there are definitely going to be spoilers in this. If you haven't read Tess, we're going to be talking about like different relationships in her life and the consequences of them, and just the way that she responds to certain events. So that's going to involve telling you a bit about the plot. So I would just not watch this if you don't want to be spoiled for Tess. I've got a beautiful edition here that my mum got for me. It is a Folio Society edition with wood engravings by Peter Reddick. So every now and then I'm going to be trying to find a little engraving to illustrate the points that I'm going to be making. I'm not expecting this video to be at all coherent, so you are warned. And I'm drinking my morning tea out of my strawberry mug in reference to the infamous scene where Alec d'Urberville essentially sexually assaults Tess with a strawberry. So she says, yeah, I like strawberries when they're ready, and he's like, they're ready now, and he forces her to eat the strawberry, and it's all very grim and foreshadows the way that he's going to treat her in the future, shall we say. So I thought that was a fitting mug to use as we're discussing Tess. So yeah, so people seem to think that Tess is quite a weak character. So I've made a little list of her character traits, and I'm basically just going to recite them for you. So she is very caring to both people and animals. In her family, it's clear that she acts as a kind of surrogate mother figure. So her siblings are not without a mother, but Hardy makes it quite clear that their mother perhaps isn't fully grown up, and she isn't a fully rounded parental character. So the highlight of her week is when she's able to escape for a couple of hours to Rolliver's Tavern. She is constantly doing the laundry because she can never get it done on laundry day. There is actually a woodcut to that effect. Not that one. This is Mrs. Derbyfield still doing the laundry on, I think it's a Friday, when it should be done on Monday. And her father has these propensities towards drink, and he is not a very reliable businessman. So from the start of the book, and also as the book goes on, the family increasingly depends on Tess, and Tess increasingly shows them love, affection and care. Even though she lives with her family for very little of the book, we can see that she really cares deeply for them, because people are able to use it to manipulate her. In particular, Alec d'Urberville, he is able to say, oh, well, if you do this with me, your siblings will get this, or, oh, I've done this for your siblings today, so therefore you kind of owe me something else. And if she didn't have that love for them, that wouldn't be such an effective tool. We also see it in when she then meets her siblings at later stages, and she sees that they've grown and they've changed. That's something that she really notices, and she really has that constantly on her mind, like what her family needs and what her siblings need. And she is also like looking towards the future for them, even towards the end of the book when she's very pessimistic about her own future. She is hopeful towards the future of her siblings, and she sees that as worthy of prioritising over her own future. So yeah, she's very caring towards her siblings. She's like a family lady. She's also obviously caring towards her own child for the short period in which it lives, in spite of this being a time that is very emotionally challenging for Tess overall. That doesn't get in the way of her maternal affection for her baby. The other people that she really cares for include some of her colleagues at various points, particularly the other dairymaids that she works with, so Retty, Marion and Is Hewitt. And they form this like really beautiful close friendship, where they are all kind of emotionally interdependent. They all offer each other support with various issues, particularly their shared affection for Angel Clare, but also like other aspects they discuss and share and care for each other about. It's a really beautiful depiction of female friendship and the strength of female friendship, to me, in a book where you wouldn't expect to find it, because it's a book that's written by a man. Just being mean to male authors there, but they don't generally have the time for depicting a beautiful, strong female friendship group. her compassion for the other dairymaids actually affects her actions in the same way that her siblings affect her actions, in that she is very attached to Retty Priddle, and when she hears that Retty has taken a bit of a downward turn after her marriage to Angel, and Retty has actually attempted suicide, Tess's compassion for her and her guilt and her care related to that is one of the big motivators that pushes her to reveal to Angel some of her background and her history, which then obviously doesn't turn out very well for her. People do say that she's naive and overly trusting to share this with Angel. Particularly her mum is very critical of her being open with him and being honest. Obviously being honest is a desirable character trait, particularly for the Victorians. They love that kind of thing. I mean, I would say that mostly through the ages, honesty is seen as a good thing. But it's not just about honesty, it's also about Tess's feeling that she doesn't deserve any more than her friends, and because what she has got has negatively impacted her friends, then she becomes like she has guilt related to that. And I think the way that guilt impacts on Tess's actions is another big part of her personality, possibly in a slightly less positive way. But yes, she's somebody who is constantly trying to atone for a sense that she has of having done wrong. That also comes into play with the next thing that she's caring towards, which is animals, in particular Prince, the family horse. So Tess doesn't see Prince as simply a beast of burden. She sees him possibly more like a pet, and indeed the whole family kind of share this attachment to Prince. Her father decides to like bury him by hand. That's kind of part of his kind of nobility complex, but it's also part of his, like, it shows the family's affection for that horse and like how important that horse was to them as a family. Prince dies in a very brutal and disturbing way, and again Tess feels a very strong sense of guilt for that, and also like a grief because she did care for him as a being. There are other animals that she shows her care for. This is not the only personality trait that I've got, by the way. Firstly, the chickens that she goes to look after for Mrs. d'Urberville, Alec's mum. I've got a little picture there of Tess taking the chickens to Mrs. d'Urberville. And Tess actually doubts her ability to look after these chickens, and it's her mum who reassures her and says, look, you grew up with poultry, so you know how to look after them. And Tess does take to this job quite well, and she takes to looking after the songbirds, whistling to them, looking after them. There are moments where Tess is shown to be quite like happy and optimistic in this role, because she is good with animals, and there's constantly a strong association between Tess and nature in the book, but also Tess and living beings that are without protection, because of that parallel between Tess and these other living beings that are beautiful and unprotected, beautiful and unable to protect themselves, I suppose. Then the next animals that she shows her like ability to be caring for are the cows at the dairy place. There's a little picture of them too. Or I thought there was. Oh. Well, there's Angel doing some milking at least. And there's quite a lot in the book about how she kind of develops almost a relationship with certain cows, where she becomes the best able to work with them and to milk them because they trust her, and they have this sense that she is somebody that they can trust. As animals, I don't know how to articulate it best, but there is this very strong like linkage between Tess and certain beings, and Tess and these dairy cows have the closest thing to a friendship that you could have between a human and an animal. So that's quite a beautiful aspect of Tess. And then also there are animals that she knows less well, but also shows a great deal of compassion for. So there is one point where she is sleeping in the woods while she is on her journey, and she wakes up in the morning and finds herself surrounded by injured birds that have been shot by sort of well-to-do hunters. And out of compassion and empathy for these birds, she actually kills them in order to end their suffering. And I think that really shows, again, that aspect of Tess that is about looking after other beings, and she actually uses that to to reason herself out of a very dark emotional place, because she sees the suffering of these birds and she relates it back to her emotional position, and she kind of tells herself, look, you're not physically unwell, you need to push on and keep going. And that is another aspect of Tess's character. She is resilient. And she's resourceful, and she picks herself up after every crisis. And she learns over the course of the book. After the first crisis with Alec, it takes her a very long time to pick herself back up again. She has a baby. The baby sadly passes away. And like some time passes before she is able to seek to go forth into the world again, and to push herself to restart her life, as it were. But later on, when Angel, deserts her, it only actually takes her a few days, and she actually talks herself into, right, you know, I've done this before now, I am able to do this again and take myself somewhere else and try again to lead a life where maybe I'm not happy, but I am able to offer some support to support myself and support my family. So yeah, she just is resilient. She picks herself up. She goes and she finds herself new jobs. She repeatedly gets herself away from Alec, for instance, to start with. She's actually really sassy, which is another thing that I love about her. So at one point, Alec is giving her a lift in his carriage, and he is trying to beg for a kiss, and Tess is not happy about this because obviously she doesn't want to kiss him. And she pretends that her bonnet has flown off, and she's like, oh no, I've got to go grab my bonnet. So he stops the carriage, she gets down, she grabs her bonnet, and then she walks the next 6 miles to avoid getting back into the carriage with Alec, just to teach him a lesson. It doesn't really work, apparently. He doesn't seem to get the message that you're not supposed to kiss girls without them wanting to be kissed. But it's, you know, I like that kind of the spirit that she has in fighting back to him in that way. Later on, there's a cool scene where she whacks him with a glove because he is, again, being a little bit too persistent. So she's got that kind of feisty side to her. And that ability to like extricate herself from those situations where she is able to. Unfortunately, then in the chase, she reaches a position where she is not able to extricate herself because she is lost with Alec. Throughout the book, she's shown a bit as being quite a decisive person. I think I'll come back to that. So she decisively removes herself from one difficult situation to get onto this horse with Alec. And that puts her in a situation where she is not able to protect herself. But where she is able to protect herself, she does. She hits him with a glove. She removes herself. He's at Flintcomash. She leaves for other reasons. She removes herself from him there. She just constantly just tries to put herself out of harm's way. Or even he tries to persuade her to come back to Tantridge. And instead she goes to Kingsbere, and so on and so forth. Like, she is constantly moving herself out of the way of danger. It's just that danger keeps pursuing her. I've already mentioned that she reasons with herself when she is at her most down, for instance, with the injured birds. I've already mentioned, I think, that she looks for hope in the future for her siblings, even when she has no hope for herself. And she is resourceful in that she's not afraid to literally walk for miles and sleep in the woods when she has to. So yeah, I don't see how that can not be seen as quite a strength. I mean, obviously it would have been quite normal for somebody who had grown up in the countryside to do that kind of thing, but when she feels like she needs to go and see Angel's family, she does, like, I think it's like a 24-mile round trip to see them. Unfortunately, she is also, I suppose diffident might be the word. She doesn't see herself as having a claim on them, and that means that she doesn't actually go forward with actually meeting them. She tries to, but she doesn't quite manage it through various factors that happen on the day. But the fact is that she pushed herself to make that huge journey for the sake of it, and I think that shows that she has got some kind of inner determination to her. I have just mentioned briefly that she's a decision maker. She acts swiftly when she needs to. So the one incident that I see as being like really key to this is she's working at Flintcomb Ash. Liza Lou turns up and tells her that both of her parents are very, very ill. Tess is engaged in a contract where she is not allowed to leave the farm, but she very quickly makes the decision that this is what she needs to do because she needs to be there for her family. So she makes a decision to break her contract and sets out immediately to go back to help her family. She goes back and she finds things in disarray. She finds a lot of problems that have been neglected, and she immediately starts working on their allotment plot to be able to build things up ready for the next year. So she's already like looking to the future and looking to rebuild and pick them back up from that. So she's her decisiveness is a real strength in that. So yeah, so she acts swiftly then. I had another example for that, but I can't quite remember what it was. And there's also the fact that people look up to her and people defer to her and people kind of want to know what she thinks, from her siblings to also the other dairymaids. And they are confused when Tess doesn't know what to do. So when Alec turns up at Flintcomb Ash, the other dairymaids are aware that this is a problem for Tess, but they don't really know what to do about it because they're so used to Tess being almost the competent one. That it takes them a very long time to work out that they should like respond and look out for her, and they eventually do write to Angel to tell him that Tess is at risk. But it takes them a while to do that because they're so used to deferring to Tess. So I think that's another illustration of just how strong Tess is as a character, that they are almost like without her, when she loses that strength, she almost leaves a bit of a vacuum in their friendship group. What else have we got here? She is a quick learner, so she learns from her experiences. I've already said she learns to like pick herself up a little bit more quickly as each thing goes wrong, but she also like learns skills quickly. So there's this thing where when she first arrives at the dairy, there's a reference to the fact that Tess doesn't know how to skim, so she's not involved in the skimming, but Tess learns how to skim. I'll see if I can find, I think I did have, oh, there's the picture of the cows that Tess has a friendship with. Got a picture of skimming here somewhere. Yeah, again it's Tess and Alec. Angel, goodness. Eventually she becomes actually like the most trusted skimmer because she's like recognised as being the one that's got the most delicate control. Later on at Flintcomb Ash, she is the one that is stood up on top of the machine because she's the one that's seen as being like the best at handling these what do you call them? Things that need to go into the threshing machine. Things! You can tell agriculture is my strong point. So she is responsible and she's viewed as having the skills to be able to do that. And she's also very versatile. She tries her hand at a variety of different job roles through the book and becomes, in all of them, somebody who is trusted to perform that. And I think that shows, again, like, something quite impressive about her character, that even when she's like emotionally in quite difficult places, she's still able to like take on new things, take on new skills, and yeah, just build her abilities and build her versatility for facing new things. Are you bored yet? You probably are bored because this is just me saying I love Tess repeatedly. And she also learns on an intellectual level. So she obviously falls in love with Angel. There's stuff at the start of the book about how she has grown up in this kind of intersection between the old kind of myths and legends and like folklore of the Vale of Blackmoor, I think it's called, which is where she grows up, and the new schooling system. So she's got this kind of intersection there, and then as she grows throughout her life, she obviously meets Angel, and Angel tries to teach her a lot of things in terms of the way that he sees the world, and Tess picks that up. She kind of like almost soaks it up like a sponge. She like really drinks in his words and then is able to like reapply them. Hardy is quite dismissive of Tess's understanding of these things. Angel is very dismissive of Tess's understanding of these things as well. But the way that she is able to like retain that information in a good enough way to be able to then apply it to future situations in terms of when she meets Alec again. So she's obviously had the capacity to take on that, even though she's not got a very strong academic background, compared to Angel. On that note, I think a lot of the struggles that Tess has on like an emotional level is that she is grappling with things that she doesn't understand, and she's often trying to put her own interpretation onto that. So earlier on in the book we hear a lot of references to the way that she interprets the world around her. For instance, she tells her brother that they live on a blighted star as an explanation for why so much unhappy stuff happens to their family. Later on we see her explaining the idea of the soul to her, and how she believes that the soul can have like an out-of-body experience, and she is quite articulate in the way that she explains like her ideas around kind of fatalism and spiritualism. That ability to create her own interpretations for things is massively undermined by Angel. He is he's drawn to that aspect of her. He finds it fascinating that she has this this kind of philosophy, but then he teaches her his own philosophy and kind of laughs at her every time that she kind of suggests her own thing. So I think it's just one of the many examples in the book of like Tess's worth being underappreciated by the characters around her. And another character trait that she has is that she's very dutiful. She's dutiful to her parents, and once she's married, she's dutiful to her husband. So she doesn't like question him or fight back against him when he like criticizes her naivety. She never like argues with him, because she sees it as, you know, her duty as a wife to just obey what he says. So yes, what else? I've got a couple of like little bits and pieces here as well. So she's got a sense of humor. It doesn't appear everywhere in the book, but it does get her into trouble. So she laughs at, is it Dark Car, the Queen of Spades, when she has this very comical like treacle falling down her back, and that leads to a fight. But there are other moments in the book where Tess is described as laughing and having this like beautiful, interesting laugh that actually, it's one of the things that draws people's attention to her, is her like spirited sense of humour, which I think is often like very little mentioned amongst all of the negativity of Tess, that she does actually have this optimistic side to her at times. Unfortunately, it is quite limited, particularly by the events that are constantly pursuing her, that are more negative in manner. But she does have that ability to be happy, and Hardy does talk about the fact that like while she's at Talbothays, she has a very happy period in her life. But he almost like skips over the happier moments to focus on the more pessimistic moments, because he's trying to write a book which appeals to a certain sensibility and a certain morality of the time. So writing about Tess having a wonderful time wouldn't really have been appealing. She is also like very nostalgic in character, not just nostalgic for happier times in her own life, like when she meets up with the dairymaids again and they're reflecting on the happy times that they had at Talbothays, but also nostalgic for an unknown past. So at the point where she is sitting by her ancestor's grave and she is kind of thinking about the life that they had almost, we get this kind of sense that she has got like this strong nostalgic tilt to her character. And I'm quite a nostalgic person as well. It's one of the reasons I love Victorian literature. So I think that's one of the areas in which I quite strongly relate to Tess. And the other thing that I've got down here is that she likes music and singing. That's another little character fact for Tess. And she like learns to sing certain songs because she thinks that Angel would like them. And one of the things that draws her to Angel is him playing on his harp, and she's like interested to hear that because she likes music. And obviously we also see her like whistling earlier on in the book. So that's just like a little interest that she has. So that was me talking for a very long time about Tess. Feel free to tell me your views and your opinions in the comments. I know that this wasn't really all that coherent, but I will just leave you with this lovely woodcut picture which comes from this like very hellish scene where Tess is working on her allotment and Angel appears, and they're both like using pitchforks to toss weeds onto the fire, and it's like a vision of hell. And then when she finally recognises Alec, Alec says that it's just like paradise, and it's just so not like paradise. It's like a vision of hell, and that's just one of the many beautiful and atmospheric moments of the book, which, aside from Tess, is one of the reasons why it's just so amazing. So yeah, let me know what you thought. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm sorry that this has been hopelessly incoherent and probably quite boring. Congratulations if you made it to the end. Bye bye.